Elena Voss paid $15 for a locked suitcase at a dusty estate auction. What she found inside would connect her to a decades-old FBI cover-up that powerful people had killed to protect. The ceiling fans in Maplewood Community Center barely stirred the thick August air. Elena Voss stood near the back wall, fanning herself with the auction catalog while sweat traced lines down her spine. She had been here for nearly 4 hours, watching furniture and household goods pass under the auctioneer's gavel, waiting for something, anything, that might be worth the gas money she had spent driving out to this forgotten corner of Vermont. Teaching high school English paid the bills, but barely. The divorce had taken half of everything, and her ex-husband's lawyer had been better than hers. Now Elena lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a pharmacy in Bridgeport, drove a car that coughed black smoke every morning, and spent her weekends hunting estate sales for things she could resell online. It was not the life she had imagined at 22 when she graduated with honors and believed the world owed her something for being smart and working hard. The auctioneer, a barrel-chested man named Holloway with a voice like gravel in a blender, gestured toward a cluster of items near the stage. His thick fingers pointed at what looked like discarded junk, things nobody wanted but someone had to haul away. Lot 53, miscellaneous estate items, Holloway announced, barely glancing at the pile. Leather suitcase, box of old books, broken clock radio, some picture frames. Let's start at $10. Anyone? $10 for the lot? The room was silent except for the laboring fans and the shuffle of feet on worn linoleum. Elena studied the suitcase from where she stood. Brown leather, scuffed and weathered, with brass corners turned green from age. 2 heavy locks secured the latches, the kind that suggested whatever was inside had mattered to someone once. No key visible anywhere near it. The rest of the lot looked like garbage. But that suitcase called to her. Something about the weight of it, the way it sat solid and purposeful among the clutter, made her raise her hand. 15, Elena said, her voice cutting through the humid air. Holloway's gavel came down almost before she finished speaking. Sold to the lady in the back. Next lot. No one else had even tried. That should have told her something. Elena paid at a folding table near the entrance, counting out 3 fives from her wallet while the volunteer, an elderly woman with bifocals on a beaded chain, barely looked at her face. Just another transaction in a long, boring day. Elena received a crumpled receipt and carried her purchase to the parking lot, where heat shimmered off the asphalt in visible waves. The suitcase was heavier than it looked. She had to use both hands to lift it into the trunk of her Honda Civic, and when she set it down, the car's suspension groaned under the weight. Elena paused, one hand still resting on the warm leather, and felt the first flutter of curiosity mix with unease in her stomach. What could possibly be inside something this old that weighed so much? The drive back to Bridgeport took 45 minutes through winding country roads flanked by forests that pressed close to the pavement. Vermont was beautiful in a way that felt lonely, all that green emptiness stretching in every direction. Elena had moved here 3 years ago for a fresh start after the divorce, hoping small-town life would be simpler, quieter. Instead, it had been isolating. She knew her neighbors' faces but not their names. She taught students who looked through her rather than at her. She existed in this place without belonging to it. By the time she pulled into the alley behind her apartment building, the sun had started its descent toward the mountains, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. Elena hauled the suitcase up the narrow back stairs, stopping twice to rest her burning arms and catch her breath. Her second-floor apartment was small and cluttered with books, the walls lined with shelves she had built herself because she could not afford to hire someone. The suitcase barely fit on her kitchen table, shoving aside a stack of ungraded essays and a half-empty coffee mug. She stood there for a long moment, just staring at it under the overhead light. The leather was cracked in places, worn smooth in others where hands had gripped it repeatedly over years. The locks were solid brass, old-fashioned mechanisms that would require either a key or tools to open. She tried the latches experimentally. They did not budge even slightly. Elena made herself a cup of tea, Earl Grey with honey, and sat down at the table. She was good at puzzles. She taught literature, which meant she spent her days helping teenagers decode symbolism and subtext, finding meaning in what was not explicitly stated. This suitcase was a puzzle. Someone had locked it decades ago, and now it sat in her kitchen, waiting. She retrieved her toolbox from the hall closet, a battered metal thing she had inherited from her father before he died. Inside were tools he had taught her to use, back when she was a girl who followed him around hardware stores and asked questions about everything. She selected a flathead screwdriver, a hammer, and a pair of pliers. The first lock took over an hour. Elena worked carefully, prying and probing, trying not to damage the mechanism more than necessary. Something about this case demanded respect, even if it was just old junk. The lock finally gave with a sharp click that made her jump, the sound too loud in the quiet apartment. The second lock surrendered more easily, as if it had been waiting for its partner to go first. Elena set her tools aside and placed both palms flat on the suitcase lid. Her heart was beating faster than it should. This was ridiculous. It was probably full of someone's old clothes or photo albums, nothing worth the dramatic tension building in her chest. She lifted the lid. The smell hit her first. Old paper, musty and sharp, the scent of documents that had been sealed away from air and light for a very long time. Inside, wrapped in newspapers yellowed with age, were stacks of papers bound with rubber bands that had hardened and cracked. Elena carefully lifted the first bundle. The rubber bands snapped immediately, and papers spread across her table in a cascade of typewritten text and official seals. FBI letterhead stared back at her. Multiple documents, dozens of them, all bearing the Federal Bureau of Investigation seal at the top. She picked up one page and held it closer to the light. It was a surveillance report, dated March 1987, with sections heavily redacted in thick black marker. Names appeared and disappeared throughout the text, some visible, others obscured. Her hands were shaking now. This was not someone's old tax returns or personal letters. This was official government documentation, classified material that should not be sitting in her kitchen in a suitcase bought at an estate auction for $15. Elena sorted through more papers, her training as an English teacher kicking in automatically. She organized by date, by document type, by anything that created patterns. There were incident reports describing surveillance operations. Financial records with columns of numbers and coded abbreviations. Photographs, black and white, showing men in dark suits standing outside buildings she did not recognize. And handwritten notes in margins, cramped writing that suggested someone had been documenting things they were not supposed to document. Near the bottom of the case, beneath layers of papers, she found a manila envelope sealed with red wax. The seal had cracked with age but still held the two sides together. Elena hesitated, her fingers hovering over it. Breaking the seal felt like crossing a line, like opening something that was meant to stay closed. She broke it anyway. Inside were color photographs, faded but clear enough. A warehouse interior, industrial and stark. A man lying on concrete, blood pooled dark beneath him. Crime scene markers placed around the body, little yellow triangles with numbers. Close-ups of the man's face, eyes open and staring, the expression frozen in something that looked like surprise. Clipped to the back of the photos was a single page on FBI letterhead, typewritten in the style of the 1980s, with a red stamp across the top that read, "Classified, internal use only." Elena read it slowly, her tea going cold beside her. Case file, Operation Clearwater. Subject, Daniel Castellano, federal informant, deceased. Date, April 3, 1987. Location, Riverside Industrial Complex, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Status, closed, accidental death. The report described Castellano as a confidential informant who had been providing information about organized crime operations in the Philadelphia area. According to the official narrative, Castellano had died from an accidental fall at an industrial site while meeting his handler. No evidence of foul play. Case closed within 48 hours. But someone had written in the margin, in small, precise handwriting, "Castellano was executed." 3 agents present. Evidence destroyed. Witness silenced. File must be preserved. Elena read that line 3 times, her pulse hammering in her ears. She set the page down carefully, as if it might explode, and stared at the pile of documents covering her kitchen table. This was not just old paperwork. This was evidence of a murder. Evidence that the FBI had covered up the killing of their own informant, and someone, whoever had owned this suitcase, had kept detailed records of that cover-up for nearly 40 years. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her apartment suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in. She walked to the window and looked down at the street below. A dark sedan was parked across from her building, engine off, windows tinted. She did not recognize it. Bridgeport was a small town. She knew most of the cars that parked on her street. That car had not been there when she arrived home. Elena backed away from the window, her breath coming faster. She was being paranoid. It was just a car. Someone visiting a neighbor, someone passing through, someone with a perfectly ordinary reason to park there. But her hands were still shaking, and the photographs of Daniel Castellano's body were still spread across her table, and that margin note kept echoing in her mind, 3 agents present. If those agents were still alive, still working, still in positions of power, they would do anything to keep this secret buried. And Elena, a high school English teacher living alone in a Vermont apartment, had just uncovered it. She returned to the table and began photographing everything with her phone. She worked methodically, training her journalist instincts from college coming back despite the years. Every page, every photograph, every handwritten note. She uploaded the images to a cloud storage account as she went, creating redundant backups. If something happened to the physical documents, if someone came for them, at least the information would survive. When she finished, Elena carefully repacked everything into the suitcase, closed the lid, and shoved it under her bed. Out of sight but not out of mind. She pulled out her laptop and started searching for information about Daniel Castellano, about Operation Clearwater, about anything that might tell her what she had stumbled into. The search results were sparse. One newspaper article from the Philadelphia Inquirer, dated April 5, 1987, briefly mentioned Castellano's death as an industrial accident. No follow-up stories. No investigation coverage. Nothing. Someone had scrubbed this clean. Someone with resources and power had made sure this story disappeared. Elena leaned back in her chair, exhaustion settling over her like a weight. She had gone to an estate auction looking for things to resell. Furniture, maybe some vintage kitchenware, anything to supplement her teacher's salary and help her stop counting pennies every month. Instead, she had bought a suitcase full of secrets that powerful people had killed to protect. She thought about the margin note again, that cramped handwriting insisting the file must be preserved. Who had written that? Whose estate sale had she attended? She pulled out the crumpled receipt from her purse and studied it. The sale had been for the estate of Margaret Hollister, deceased, no other information provided. Elena opened a new search window and typed in the name. Multiple results appeared, but one caught her attention immediately. Margaret Hollister, retired FBI administrative assistant, died August 2 at age 78. Services private. No other details provided. An FBI employee. The suitcase had belonged to someone who worked for the Bureau, someone who had access to classified files, someone who had kept this evidence hidden for decades and then died, leaving it behind to be sold off with broken clocks and picture frames. Elena closed her laptop and sat in the growing darkness of her apartment. She had not turned on any lights, and the room had filled with shadows as the sun set behind the mountains. The dark sedan was still parked across the street. She could see it from her window, a solid shape against the gathering night. She had a choice to make. She could repack that suitcase, drive it somewhere far away, and dump it in a lake or a landfill. Pretend she never opened it. Go back to teaching Shakespeare to bored teenagers and hunting estate sales on weekends. Stay safe. Stay invisible. Or she could do what Margaret Hollister had apparently wanted someone to do. Preserve the file. Bring the truth into the light. Make sure Daniel Castellano's death, and whatever corruption had covered it up, did not stay buried forever. Elena thought about her students, about how she taught them that literature mattered because truth mattered, that stories had power to change the world. She thought about her father, who had taught her to fix things that were broken, to stand up straight, to not back down when something was hard. She thought about the life she had been living, small and lonely and safe, and realized she was tired of being afraid. Elena stood, walked to her kitchen, and made another cup of tea. This time she added whiskey from the bottle she kept for bad nights. Then she returned to her laptop and began typing an email to the only investigative journalist she knew, a former college classmate who now worked for a major newspaper. The subject line read, "I have evidence of FBI corruption. Need to talk. Urgent." She hit send before she could change her mind. Outside, the dark sedan remained motionless, watching and waiting, while inside her apartment, Elena Voss prepared for a fight she had never wanted but could no longer avoid. What Elena doesn't know yet is that opening that suitcase has set events in motion that will force her to confront not just a decades-old conspiracy, but the very people who have spent their careers making problems disappear. And in a fight between one woman and an institution with unlimited resources, survival becomes the only victory that matters. Click Part 2 to discover what happens when the people who buried the truth come looking for the woman who dug it up. The email response came at 3:47 a.m., jolting Elena awake from restless sleep. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen glowing harsh in the darkness. She grabbed it with trembling hands, squinting at the message from her former college classmate, Rebecca Torres, now an investigative journalist at the Washington Herald. "Elena, are you serious? If you have what you say you have, do not contact anyone else. Do not talk about this on the phone. Meet me tomorrow, 2 p.m., Riverside Diner off Route 7. Come alone. Delete this message after reading. R." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. The urgency in Rebecca's words confirmed what she had suspected. This was bigger and more dangerous than she had imagined. She deleted the message as instructed, then lay in the darkness listening to every creak and groan of the old building, wondering if the dark sedan was still parked outside. She did not sleep again that night. By morning, Elena had made copies of everything. She burned 3 USB drives with complete sets of the documents and photographs, hiding one in a false bottom she created in her coffee canister, mailing another to her sister in Oregon with instructions not to open it unless something happened to her, and keeping the third in her purse. The original suitcase and its contents went into a storage unit across town, paid for with cash under a false name. If they came for her, they would not find everything. The drive to Riverside Diner took 90 minutes through mountain roads that twisted like serpents through dense forest. Elena kept checking her rearview mirror, watching for vehicles that stayed too close or followed too long. Twice she pulled off at random exits, circling back to see if anyone followed. No one did, or at least no one she could detect. The diner sat at a lonely crossroads where 2 forgotten highways intersected, surrounded by nothing but trees and the ghost of better economic times. Half the neon letters in the sign had burned out. Only 3 cars occupied the gravel parking lot. Elena pulled in at exactly 2 p.m. and spotted Rebecca immediately through the window, sitting in a back booth with clear sight lines to both entrances. Rebecca had changed since college. Her dark hair was shorter, streaked with premature gray. Lines creased the corners of her eyes, the mark of someone who had seen too much and slept too little. But her gaze was sharp as Elena slid into the booth across from her, and her voice was steady. "You look terrified," Rebecca said without preamble. "I am terrified," Elena admitted. "There's a car that's been watching my apartment. I don't know if I'm paranoid or if I'm not paranoid enough. Show me what you have." Elena glanced around the diner. An elderly couple sat near the front, working through pie and coffee. A trucker hunched over the counter, reading a newspaper. The waitress stood by the kitchen window, looking bored. No one seemed interested in them. She pulled the USB drive from her purse and slid it across the table. Rebecca pocketed it immediately, her expression neutral. "I'll need to verify these documents," Rebecca said quietly. "If they're authentic, if they show what you say they show, this is explosive." FBI agents covering up the murder of their own informant? That's not just corruption. That's a conspiracy that could reach the highest levels of the Bureau. The woman who owned the suitcase was named Margaret Hollister, Elena said. She was an FBI administrative assistant. She died 2 weeks ago. I think she kept these files as insurance, or maybe as evidence she hoped someone would eventually find. Rebecca nodded slowly, her journalist instincts clearly working through the angles. Hollister. I'll run that name. See what connections I can find. But Elena, you need to understand something. If what you've given me is real, the people implicated in this will do anything to stop it from coming out. Anything. These aren't street criminals. These are federal agents with access to resources you can't imagine. I know, Elena whispered. I'm already scared they know I have the files. They might, Rebecca said bluntly. Estate sales are public record. If anyone was monitoring Hollister's property after her death, they could have flagged unusual purchases. The suitcase disappearing would have raised alarms. Elena felt her stomach drop. So what do I do? You disappear. Today. Right now. Don't go home. Don't contact anyone from your regular life. I'll put you in touch with someone who can help you stay hidden while I work on verifying and publishing this story. Once it's public, once the information is out there, you're safer. They can't put the genie back in the bottle. I can't just disappear, Elena protested. I have a job, students, responsibilities. You have a target on your back, Rebecca interrupted. Those responsibilities won't matter if you're dead. Elena, I need you to trust me. I've done this before. I know how to protect sources. But you have to do exactly what I tell you. Before Elena could respond, the bell above the diner door chimed. 3 men in dark suits walked in, their eyes scanning the room with practiced efficiency. They moved with a coordinated precision that screamed law enforcement. One positioned himself near the front door. Another took the counter seat closest to their booth. The third walked directly toward them. Rebecca's expression did not change, but Elena saw her hand drop beneath the table, probably reaching for her phone or a weapon. The man stopped at their booth, tall and broad-shouldered with gray temples and eyes like chips of ice. Ms. Torres, he said, his voice carrying the flat authority of someone accustomed to obedience. And Ms. Voss. I think we need to have a conversation. I don't know you, Rebecca said evenly. And we're not interested in conversation. The man reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately, and produced a credentials case. He flipped it open to show an FBI badge and identification. Special Agent Thomas Brennan, the ID read, Philadelphia Field Office. I know exactly who you are, Ms. Torres, Brennan said. You're an investigative journalist with a reputation for making trouble. And Ms. Voss, you recently purchased items at an estate sale that belonged to the federal government. Items that were stolen property. Rebecca smiled grimly. Because this is what I do. I expose the truth that powerful people want hidden. And because Daniel Castellano deserves justice, even if it's 37 years late. She moved toward the door. I'll be back in 3 days. Don't leave this cabin. Don't contact anyone. If something goes wrong, there's a rifle in the closet and a satellite phone in the kitchen drawer. Use it only for emergencies. Then she was gone, and Elena was alone in the silent cabin with nothing but her thoughts and the weight of secrets that had already cost at least one life. The next 72 hours crawled past like years. Elena rationed the canned food, kept the wood stove burning as evening temperatures dropped, and tried not to think about armed men finding the cabin. She read the only book on the shelf, a worn copy of Thoreau's Walden, and found bitter irony in his celebration of solitude and self-reliance. On the morning of the 4th day, she heard a vehicle approaching. Elena grabbed the rifle from the closet, her hands steadier than they had been at the diner, and positioned herself where she could see the door. The vehicle stopped. A door slammed. Elena, it's me, Rebecca's voice called. Don't shoot. Elena lowered the rifle and opened the door. Rebecca stood there with a stack of newspapers in her arms, her face showing exhaustion but also triumph. "We did it," Rebecca said, spreading the papers across the small table. Front page. The Washington Herald, the New York Times picked it up, the Boston Globe, everyone. FBI covered up informant's murder for decades, documents reveal. It's everywhere. Elena stared at the headlines, at the photographs she had taken from the suitcase now printed for the world to see. Her hands trembled as she picked up the Herald and read Rebecca's byline above a story that detailed everything: Operation Clearwater, Daniel Castellano's execution, the 3 agents involved, Margaret Hollister's secret preservation of the evidence. "What happens now?" Elena asked. "Now Congress demands hearings," Rebecca said. "The FBI launches an internal investigation, though we both know that's theater. The Justice Department will probably appoint a special prosecutor. And you, Elena, you're going to testify. You're the one who found the evidence. You're the one who had the courage to bring it forward." "I'm terrified," Elena admitted. "Good," Rebecca said. "You should be. This isn't over. The people we've exposed will fight back. But you're not alone anymore. You have allies now, lawyers, other journalists, congressional representatives who want answers. And most importantly, you have the truth on your side." Elena looked down at the newspapers again, at the story that had transformed her from an invisible high school teacher into someone who had challenged one of the most powerful institutions in America. She thought about her students, about what she had taught them about courage and integrity and the importance of standing up for what was right even when it was hard. "What about Castellano's family?" she asked. "Does he have anyone left who knows the truth now?" "A daughter," Rebecca said softly. "She's 53 now. I spoke with her yesterday. She cried when I told her what we'd found. She spent her whole life thinking her father was just a criminal who died in an accident. Now she knows he was murdered, and she knows why. It doesn't bring him back, but it's something. It's justice, even if it's late." Elena felt tears sting her eyes. All of this, the fear and the hiding and the risk, had been worth it for that one person who finally knew the truth about her father. Over the following weeks, Elena's life transformed again. She testified before 3 different congressional committees, her face broadcast on national news. She resigned from her teaching position, unable to return to anonymity even if she wanted to. A book deal came, and movie offers, and more money than she had ever imagined. But the most important thing came 6 months later, when the Justice Department announced indictments. 2 of the 3 agents involved in Castellano's death were still alive. Thomas Brennan, who had threatened her in the diner, was one of them. He was arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. Elena stood outside the federal courthouse in Philadelphia on the day of Brennan's arraignment, watching him walk up the steps in handcuffs. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, his authority stripped away. When he passed her, their eyes met for just a moment. She saw something in his expression that might have been respect or might have been hatred. She did not care which. That evening, Elena sat in her new apartment in Washington, D.C., a place with actual security and space and windows that looked out over something other than empty streets. She opened her laptop and began writing. Not the book publishers wanted, not yet. This was something else, something personal. She wrote about Margaret Hollister, the FBI administrative assistant who had kept those files hidden for decades, waiting for someone brave enough to bring them to light. She wrote about the courage it took to preserve evidence knowing you might never see justice in your lifetime. She wrote about ordinary people who made extraordinary choices when faced with corruption and evil. And she wrote about a locked suitcase found at an estate auction, and how sometimes the most important things in our lives come from the most unexpected places. When she finished, Elena saved the document and looked out her window at the city lights spreading below. She thought about her students, about the lessons she used to teach about literature and truth and the power of stories to change the world. She had lived those lessons now. She had become the story she used to teach. And somewhere in the darkness, she hoped Daniel Castellano could rest easier, knowing that finally, After 37 years, the truth had won. Justice does not always come quickly. But when it comes, even after decades of silence and lies, it is worth every sacrifice made along the way. And for Elena Voss, the fight for truth had transformed her from someone who merely taught about courage into someone who lived it. The suitcase, empty now of its secrets, sat in her closet as a reminder. A reminder that ordinary objects can hold extraordinary truths. That ordinary people can do extraordinary things. And that sometimes, the most important discoveries happen when we're brave enough to open what others have locked away.